So I want us to frame this conversation in a way where it's not just me regurgitating things that you've likely heard in some capacity, or even if you haven't necessarily heard it, you experientially have gone through some interaction with Ramadan or heard about it, that you are aware of certain things, right? Because we want to now start to kind of deconstruct a little bit more so that the relationship can get deeper. So rather than starting out with just, this is how you fast and these kinds of things, I want us to think about knowledge in a couple of different frames and how we like learn and acquire knowledge, or how we know things. Does that make sense so far? So one of the primary ways that we understand things is just innately, intuitively. It just comes to you, right? So I have a 6-year-old son, 9-year-old daughter. Well, I'm super excited and they're super excited because they love coming to the IC, and they haven't been able to in the last 2 years also. And they want to meet all of you and be a part of Ramadan. Intuitively, they can understand certain things as being good for them or bad for them, right? Like they already have an innate sense and reaction to certain things, that it's something that they're just wired into, that I don't have to say to them like, hey, it's not good for you to put your hand on like a flame. It's not good to like yell at, somebody and curse at them, right? I don't have to explain to them that a normal tone of voice is how I'm speaking right now, right? They innately can pick up on the idea that if one was to just like yell, that that's not the way people normally talk to each other. Do you get what I'm saying? There's certain things that they can also pick up. That's not just in terms of negatives, but in the prism of positives, that being nice to somebody, right? Like being kind, asking people how they are. There's certain things that intuitively somebody just knows and somebody understands. And a lot of the ways that you also have learned things are in this bucket of information gathering. You pick up on something and it's just innate to your being that you know that this is like the response, or this is the understanding to something. There's not an ambiguity there. There's certain things now, though, when we trickle it down, that they're not necessarily innate or intuitive. They are things that are learned. And Ramadan in and of itself has this capacity to it, right? Like you can innately as a child know and understand the concept of a God, for example, right? My kids, they're not like any smarter than any other kids in that sense. I don't have to like sit down with them and explain to them the idea that there is a divine entity, that even as children, they can conceptually understand the existence of God. Does that make sense? There's not a lot, though, that just comes along with that innately. You can't innately just understand the existence of a prophet. Nobody's going to sit down and say, I assume that the process through which revelation is disseminated came from an angel to an individual, et cetera, et cetera. Innately, it's not possible to also just recognize how ritual is formed and practiced. It's not just automatically downloaded within you. These are things now that get learned. Does that make sense? And then in our tradition, there's also a third frame of knowledge. That's just knowledge that's given to certain individuals, right? Like the prophets of God, they knew certain things that the rest of the people just didn't know, right? So they're, I don't know what we could call this, but we can say special, special people, right? You all are special. But fundamentally, there's now an access point that's learning through those people as well. So when we talk about Ramadan, there's certain things that go into all of this, right? Like most of you said you were excited. One of you said there's some worry, but the worry also stems from something unfamiliar that, at least in what was the norm, there's excitement that we're eating together, we're this and that. That's coming from something that's experiential. What you want to be able to start to focus on now are these two elements that are here. And being able to decipher for yourself, how do I render that much more of an importance to this as a practice? Because I'm getting to a place where there's a deepening in the acquisition of importance through these other two frames. So I'm going to now not just look at Ramadan in terms of what has been passed on to me, but I'm going to connect to it at a deeper level from the standpoint fundamentally of what it is that I know about it, because you can't implement something that you don't know, right? You can't act on something that isn't based in some type of information. And if most of what we're doing is based off of intuition, and intuition now starts to build itself in a place where you don't feel empowered through religion, but you're walking on eggshells. Right? Like I'm always second guessing myself or making myself feel like, you know, I'm not the one that should be knowing certain things or these kinds of things. Do you get what I mean? Does this make sense? Yeah. Can somebody say back to me what I'm saying so that I know you're not just nodding at me? What am I trying to say here? Anybody? Yes.
Like I'm just gonna use Ramadan as like a specific example.
Use it, yeah.
Like some people may just feel like, oh, like they may feel like they're fasting for like because they have to and not necessarily for like any other reason. And yeah, that could feel like you're walking on eggshells because like it's like you're just like you kind of don't want to if you just feel like you're doing it because you have to.
Great. Let me reframe this. How do you know what Ramadan is about? Like you specifically. Do you understand the question? Yeah. You had your hand raised? I saw it like this a little bit.
Spending like Ramadan with my family, like watching what my parents did and being like modeled as like model to.
Great. What were you gonna say? Somebody other hand raised. Yes.
Could you rephrase the question?
How do you know what Ramadan is like? How do you know what it's about? Yeah.
Yeah, so like in addition to what you said, like listening to different lectures and scholars, like getting their opinions and looking at their hands and stuff like that.
Okay. What else? When you were younger, how did you know what it was about? Okay, great. And a lot of that's reliant on things that are not problematic. And that's not a wrong way to do it. That's a great way to do it, right? You're turning towards individuals that you have kind of a trust in. But now you're in a sphere of existence that's very formative to your identity. And to move to a place now where the modeling of behavior in terms of externals, you can't model someone's internal behavior, right? Like you can't feel what I pray when I pray simply by praying the way that I pray. You're going to feel what you pray when you pray because your heart is in you. It's not in me. You get what I mean? And so the external in and of itself can have some type of uniformity to it, but the deepening of the internal for it to be transformational necessitates now having an opportunity to think with a sense of strength, like, hey, how do I factor into this? You get to a place where it's not now about knowing about Ramadan in particular, but knowing about me and how I relate to it. Because if we're in a place where there's God and then there's the vehicle towards God, fasting, Quran, prayer, dua, and here's you. This is me. These things don't fundamentally change, right? Tomorrow, we're not going to fast differently and say that, okay, well, now it's okay for you to drink Coke while you fast, right? Or the fasting is now until Isha time, right? It's the same. The recitation, the salah, some of it can have aspects that are malleable. You can choose like certain things to recite, but it's pretty much all the same. Allah is ghani. Allah does not change, right? There's a delusion of modernity that applies to the individual that helps us to lose sight of the fact that we have dependence as a key variable to our identity. All of us rely on something to exist. Allah alone does not rely on anything. That's why He is Rabb and we are Abd. But in this, regardless of what the ritual is, the means, it can be any of these things and that much more. If this essentially is the same and God is Ghani, then the only thing that's changing in the scenario is me. And all around me now, if I have new circumstances, I've never broken fast without my family. I've never broken fast in this space. I've never broken fast in places where I'm responsible for everybody who is breaking fast. And they're serving food and dates and whatever else. Your ability to now deepen in those knowledge buckets that we talked about is not just simply in knowing about the practice in and of itself, but knowing about everything else that our religion says that impacts the self that you're bringing to the practice. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? Are you sure? Yeah? Are you sure? So I want you to think about that as we talk about some of these things. The application to you. Because now it's not about me following somebody else for what they do, but I have to build importance to these things subjectively. A typical routine within the Sunni tradition of Islam is rooted starting in the night preceding the day, right? So the first night of Ramadan precedes the first day of Ramadan. Right, so we have within the Sunni tradition a prayer that takes place that's the Salah Tarawih. And that's prayed on the first night before, right? A lot of you know this, okay? You're going to then have suhoor, the meal that we have before we start our fast. Fajr, we then have Maghrib, Iftar, Isha, and Tarawih. As a skeleton, basic. There's other prayers in the day, right? Don't leave those out. Like you can literally sleep all day and fast, right? It's a passive act. So it's about not doing things. But we want to break these things down a little bit, okay? I want to start with suhoor rather than tarawih and think about this now in terms of what it comes down to me, right? Because a lot of you are going to choose to not have suhoor. That's a bad decision. Why is that a bad decision? Yeah.
You will not have sufficient energy throughout the rest of the day.
Yeah, you won't have any energy. I'm pretty old, so if you can talk louder, and when you're talking, talk as if you're speaking to the person sitting furthest away from you. That's how loud you want to make your voice so we can all hear each other, okay? What else? Why? Yeah. Your intention for the fast? Okay, yeah.
It's an innovation in one thing.
Can you explain that more?
Well, if we decide not to have suhoor because we want to push ourselves more so to speak or want to prolong our fast or whatever the reason may be, then we're kind of going against the sunnah.
Yeah, don't do that. if that's your reason for not eating suhoor. I feel like most of you are just sleeping through suhoor. But if you think it's more righteous to not have suhoor, that's not how our tradition works, right? In matters of externals, our Prophet ﷺ took ease. In internals, there's struggle, right? There's a distinction there. Suhoor in our tradition, yeah, go ahead.
What time is it? What time did you
You can have it up until Fajr comes in. So, like, you got to stop eating before Fajr starts. So you can't eat into Fajr. So if you wake up and it's Fajr time already, then you can't eat at that time. Does that make sense?
No, I know. I skip suhoor, but it's like, I don't skip suhoor because like I'm choosing not to, but I eat like right before I go to sleep. So that I consider that like my suhoor rather than like eating right before.
Yeah, that's fine. What I'm saying is a lot of you are skipping suhoor because it's not important to you. And that's not to defend yourself, right? But if it was important, you would do it. And it's not important to you because think about what you said in terms of the hows that you engage in Ramadan if you were born into Islam, right? And you're now at a place where you are reliant on yourself to determine what are your priorities. You get what I mean? In our tradition, the Prophet ﷺ, he says, even if you're just taking a sip of water, you want to do that for suhoor. And he associates this now with something that's very important. He associates it with barakah. What's barakah? What does that mean? Yeah.
Is it like added to your good deeds?
Huh?
Adding to your good deeds.
Okay. What else? Yep.
The benefit you have from Allah.
Anything else? Yeah.
And so obviously, like just by having a sip of water, it kind of shows that like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam isn't like stressing suhoor for the purpose of like maybe having energy later on in the day. He's saying like you're waking up and having suhoor, it's you're kind of deriving like a spiritual benefit from it. So like even if you're waking up with the intention of just having like a sip of water, and by fulfilling that sunnah of like having suhoor prior to fasting, like you're kind of like allowing like Allah's like blessings to descend upon you, and just like with that sip of water, even if it's just like a little bit, it gives you like that energy to then continue your fast for the next day.
Yeah. So barakah has three different definitions to it. It denotes increase, right? And we can call this blessing as well. This has an element of continuity to it. Now I'm just going fast because we have limited time. And there's also a part to it that becomes concrete, that it establishes itself, right? But it's metaphysical gain. It's not tangible. So it's in contrast now to materialistic gain, right? Nobody's going to come to you and say, you fasted, here's like a bucket of gold. You're not holding it in your hand. So when somebody says a word to you that you don't use in the rest of your day, do you use the word blessing in the majority of your academic classes? When you are interviewing for jobs, do you use the word blessing? So I said, what does barakah mean? All of you said the same word. You're using someone else's language. The one sip of water in and of itself is not a quantified impact, but it's a qualified impact. You're interjecting now an opportunity for increase that's continuous and it stays with you. And it now starts to make that which you're doing have that much more in terms of what's good, but it's only going to be important to you if it's important to you. You understand? It's not going to be important to you because it was important to your family. It's not going to be important to you if it was important to like somebody else in a lecture or a YouTube video. I'm not coming into your room and waking you up for suhoor. Do you know what I mean? When I moved to New York City like years ago and I started to do this for myself, I realized growing up in a Muslim family how amazing it was to have a mother that would come and not only wake me up for suhoor, but would also make food for everybody, do all kinds of things for an entire family, then stay up and read Quran. You know, alhamdulillah, that was my experience. And then I could get myself to eat like a box of Fruit Loops. I was miserable in that sense. You're giving up on some of these things. And barakah is a key ingredient, right? The things that interject blessing. You might not see it because you live in a moment, but you're part of a community that used to find itself situated in basements of buildings that were infested with rats. People would come to pray. They'd make dhikr. They'd read Quran. They'd do these things. They were increasing barakah. What would start with like Eid prayers that we would have post Ramadan that sometimes would literally have 7 people show up to them. We now get more than 5,000 people that fill that park on the day of Eid. That's barakah. And it's a consequence of barakah. Do you get what I'm saying? And you can attach it to these kinds of things. I started working here in 2005, volunteer. I slept on a couch with 4 roommates that we lived in a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment, me and 4 brown guys, terrible experience. And in that time, we've grown now to a full staff, 12 Muslim student clubs. You have the only halal certified dining hall in the country. You have wudu facilities that are just sitting there waiting for you to use them, a prayer room that has a multi-million-dollar view. It all stems from barakah. The increase, the continuity of it. You get what I'm saying? The Prophet is saying, you just take a sip of water. It's accessing that barakah. And every day you wake up in Ramadan and you miss the opportunity for even just a sip of water, the physical energy, it's important. But I would tell you, even if you wake up and it makes you sleep from Fajr till Dhuhr time, just sleep from Fajr till Dhuhr time, man. Because for no other reason, your Prophet said that there's barakah in this. So don't equate it to metrics that are rooted in something that is intuitive, which I said is one way of knowledge. You look at those other 2 buckets that we had here, and regardless of what it is that somebody else might say to you, I can't believe you slept the whole day, blah, blah, blah. You say, my Prophet told me that I need to have this meal. So I woke up to have the meal. And now I still need to get my sleep. Do you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So this is something that has metaphysical gain to it. I couldn't tell you why. And that's where those other buckets of knowledge become important. Because I don't know why we pray 3 rak'ah at Maghrib time and 4 at Isha. I don't know why in fasting there's the unique ingredient to increase awareness and consciousness. I don't know how certain things function in those ways, but that's not knowledge that I need to have necessarily. My reliance on the one that's telling me that these things will yield you those things are the things that I just have to know, and then I just kind of submit to it. You get what I'm saying? So a secular society that tells you that the pursuit of dunya is the goal, they're going to tell you, hey, you know what? Maybe you shouldn't be fasting because you got an exam or something. Maybe you should just sleep and not wake up for suhoor. Your fast still counts without it. And it does. So don't freak out if you don't wake up for suhoor. That's okay. But fundamentally, something that can be of ease should not be left behind because it's just a sip of water. Do you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? You have to decide for yourself now what's going to allow for me, knowing myself, to be able to wake up for this. What do I need to do and what do I need to cut out? How do I start utilizing Sha'ban, the month we're in right now, to start getting ready for it? You get what I mean? Does that make sense? Any thoughts on any of this so far? Yes, no? Comments, questions? Does it make sense? Go plan out for yourself what your suhoor is going to look like. Think about this now beyond the individual level, the community level, right? There's some people who this is their first Ramadan ever. They might have been born into a Muslim family, but they didn't fast in Ramadan in their family. There's going to be some people who they are new Muslims and they've never fasted before. I know at least 4 students who are NYU students who have converted to Islam in the last few months. They're going to show up. They are in a place where they're not going to be the ones by themselves that are saying, hey, you know, it'd be nice on a Saturday, we can go and have, you know, food together at a diner before Fajr starts and then all pray together. You see what I mean? You create now an opportunity to inculcate importance with others because you have thoughtfulness to your practice. This is not a religion that's about like privacy, right? But we have responsibilities towards one another. Do you know what I mean? And how you show up for others is a big part of what it's going to look like when you stand in front of God. You don't need to be like the person giving the khutbah or giving the dars to just say to people, hey, you want to go to IHOP for suhoor on Saturday? You know, you want to go to the diner and we'll get some food to eat all before Fajr starts? And you might be the reason that somebody for the first time in their life actually eats this meal. And I want you to think about that for a second. Because you don't want to have a set of understanding of what goodness is that's like very limited. But if Allah makes you the means through which somebody is introduced to this as a practice, like that's amazing. And every time they act upon it, then you're getting a portion of the ajr, not because you created the practice, but you became the means through which they felt like they could actually establish a relationship with it. You taught it to them. You get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? You're going to get now to Fajr time, right? And similar again, the Prophet ﷺ, he says the 2 sunnahs of Fajr are worth the entire world and everything in it. And so that's not just the entire world like in a kind of nature-based, like the way this world exists right now, with the trillions of dollars, the resources that are available to people from all backgrounds, everything that's there in terms of treasure, it's worth that and everything that's inside of it. Do you get what I mean? But it also comes back to this. You can't yield the blessing of something if you leave it behind. The barakah from the presence of an act is only yielded through the performance of it. And so you want to definitely be in a place where your Ramadan is enhanced because you're keeping on top of the fara'id. I'm going to throw in here now Dhuhr, Asr as well. Because for a lot of you, it's going to actually be easier to pray Fajr and Maghrib and Isha. You're going to find it harder to get up from your classrooms to pray Dhuhr and Asr on time. And it's a conundrum that, again, you don't want to be self-deprecating, right? And people, even when they leave college and they go into the workforce, they could be on top of their Fajr prayers and their Isha prayers, but the afternoon ones where they're confined to a desk that somebody else is saying to them, this is what your routine should be like, it makes it harder for them. You don't want to leave any of these things behind as best as you can. Some of us, we struggle with the performance of our prayers. I'm not knocking you on that. I went through probably from the time I was like 13 until I was 16, was in a really strange relationship with my prayer. Sometimes my family would ask if I had prayed, and I said, yes, I had when I hadn't. Sometimes they'd say to me, we know you didn't, and I would just roll out of bed and without wudu, do some combination of standing and bowing. And when I was in my senior year of high school and I started to look at religion and spirituality more, I started to cut class a lot and I'd go to the masjid. I didn't know what I was looking for. I had forgotten how to pray and I was too embarrassed and intimidated to ask anybody. There'd be times I would drive to the masjid. I would remember there was a thing called sunnah prayers. I just pray those and I'd leave. And I didn't know who to ask or where to turn towards. I know where I'm at now in terms of my relationship to prayer. And the person I am today can choose to self-deprecate the person I was prior to this, or recognize that the yesterdays I lived are what makes me today the product that I am today. You see what I mean? These things are very important. They're very important, not again because of tangible change. They might not also be things that evoke certain feelings to you, right? But we don't worship feelings in our religion. You're in a space where the performance of it, you yield to the idea that it's going to give you this. It's going to have spiritual impact, metaphysical implications. In our university, there are accommodations made for all students of all religious backgrounds. The provost literally sent out an announcement yesterday about what the policies are, or 2 days ago. Ramadan is a great time to build a relationship with other parts of your faith. But you don't want to do it with your back against the wall. The prayer becomes an important facet to our growth spiritually. It's going to be something that, again, though, you have to determine for yourself how you relate to it. And once you miss it, there's ways to make it up, but you're giving up on the blessing from doing it in the times that it's supposed to happen. There's no legal school in Islam, Sunni or Shi'i, that says that there's anything other than 5 daily prayers. Both within Sunni schools and Shi'i schools, you have different opinions intra both traditions that have different opinions on the start and end times of certain prayers. But everybody says there's 5. And so you want to just try in your routine to build that relationship with those things. Iftar, we're going to be doing here on campus every single night. You're going to have it in Rosenthal, the 10th floor of Kimmel, big space. Inshallah, a lot of people will come and fill it. Try to come and be there because there's going to be a lot of people in the early part of it who they're going to come not just looking for food to eat, but they're going to also be looking for other Muslims to be with, right? That they've lived at this university all by themselves. How was it for you in Ramadan last year by yourself on campus, like you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of isolating, especially since like it was my first time spending Ramadan by myself. So, which is why I'm like even more excited to be able to be with people this semester.
Yeah. And so others are going to have that same excitement. And you want them to come and meet people that are going to be the reason that they come back again. Do you know what I mean? So your iftar is something that's an important thing to have like planned out as well. But you want to think about it individually and also communally. Now to go to these 2 parts, suhoor and iftar, like Tariq was saying, try your best to not eat gross things. And that might be like hard to do, but the idea is not to reorient your food schedule to now just like the evening hours, right? The physicality of it is something you'll have to get adjusted to. And you might feel tired in the onset, but that's just your body responding now to a different food intake. That's why you want to start to fast in these days in Shaban. So you get used to it and you pay attention to yourself because you're not anybody else. Some of us can fast and it's like a spiritually intoxicating experience. Some of us can fast and we get a big headache, right? Doesn't mean you're better or worse. That's just how we're wired. But you don't want the first number of days that you have iftar to be something that is what it is only because you didn't do what you could do beforehand, right? The Prophet ﷺ, he says, لِصَائِمِ فَرْحَتَانِ فَرْحَةٌ عِنْدَ إِفْطَارِهِ وَفَرْحَةٌ عِنْدَ لِقَاءِ رَبِّهِ, that for the fasting person, there are two farhas, two joys. There's a joy when they break their fast, and there's a joy when they meet their Lord, right? May Allah make us amongst those who are joyful when we meet him. There's a clear and obvious joy that comes to when you break your fast, right? You didn't eat all day and now you get to eat. You know what I mean? But start to experience this prior to, right? Some of you have been fasting before in the last few months, right? How has that been so far? For those of you who've been doing it. Yeah.
I mean, since doing it every Monday and Thursday, now it's just like a regular thing. You don't really feel it.
You don't feel it, meaning what?
Like, it doesn't really make a difference. Like, you know, you're fasting.
These are not good. You don't want to say there's no point.
I mean,
to
I'm not, it's not in that sense. I'm like physically, like, or like a side effect or a physical tool. Like, there's no difference. You don't feel like, oh, you're tired or anything like that.
Okay.
But there's spiritual benefits.
So you just ruined Ramadan for everybody. It's okay. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Go ahead, man.
No, I'm just gonna translate the chart. It means like physically. It's not hard.
But compare it now to like the first time you did it, right? And maybe the days were shorter, is a little bit different, you know, but there's likely a change in like the physical impact in some capacity. Do you know what I mean? But that's the idea, right? Like Ramadan isn't about empty stomachs, it's about full hearts. You know, so the means through which we engage this is a very passive act, right? So you start to do it now, but it goes back to the entire frame of this conversation. Like, what's important to you? Is it important enough? And you have to align that importance for yourself. Do you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Okay. What time does Maghrib come in? Okay, so we got like 5-6 minutes left, right? We're going to be doing prayers on campus. There's going to be qiyams that we do, overnight prayers from like Isha till Fajr time. We're going to do a specific one that's a women's qiyam. Everything else is open to everybody. But for us to be able to provide like unique opportunities, that schedule will come out and you want to implement it as best as you can into your routine. The idea with Ramadan is to not just forego now what you do on a daily basis, right? But you got to design your life or somebody else is going to design it for you. And so what you're bringing in terms of intention has to be subjective. I want you to take like a couple of minutes and just outline in your head, what are like some of the things that are going to be those obstacles that get in your way, right? How do I tell a professor I need to leave from the classroom? You know, how do I now start to ensure that I have food to eat, right? And what we can do for, you know, helping you in these kind of cases. You know, how do I prioritize some of these other things and balance it all out? But what are the things that are really getting in the way? And are those things that are external or internalized? And can I overcome those internal obstacles to get me to that place? You see what I'm saying? Any questions or comments on any of this right now before I kind of pivot into something else? Yes, no? What do you guys think? Any thoughts? What are you thinking about right now? Yeah.
I'm thinking about maybe controlling some other things that sometimes happen as a side effect of fasting. Like I get annoyed a bit more quicker when I haven't eaten anything all day.
Yeah.
So it's like always one day during Ramadan, I just get like really pissed off at someone, and I don't think that's a good thing. So I'm going to try to control that.
It's called being hangry. It's a very real thing. Yeah, but that's good to know, right? Your self-awareness now is going to be important. So what are the things that are going to impact each one of us individually? And you have the foresight to start thinking about it now, right? When do I start to falter? What are the things that get in the way? What else? What else are we thinking about? Yeah.
I'm just like thinking about how I would take steps to make sure I take care of myself, because I like in general have a lot of struggles with eating. So I know that like if I fast, like it puts an extra like pressure on someone like me who like already struggles like health wise and like a lot of different aspects. So like being cognizant of like what other healthy things can I do for myself, like what do I eat during suhoor, what do I eat during iftar to make sure like I'm okay throughout the day, or like what steps do I take where I have breaks throughout the day so I'm like not like physically ill.
Yeah. And this is where you have to know yourself, right? And where we can be helpful to you as our staff. You want to strategize. How do I do this and build a routine? Knowing yourself and how to do it for yourself doesn't mean you have to do it alone. And where we don't have like the skill or expertise, there's a lot of people who are nutritionists, a lot of people who know various disciplines, but to be able to recognize that as you give importance to the strategy, we can help you in the shaping of that. You see what I mean, right? Yeah, go ahead. You had your hand raised.
I'm a commuter and I have a class which is like 8 a.m. So I'm really wondering like how do I balance going back home and coming from just being on top of my classes and still being spiritually in Ramadan and achieving the goal that I set for myself.
What do people think? What would you tell somebody who's got an 8 a.m. class? Because we had some students who filled out these surveys, which would be great if you filled them out, if you got it from me and Jerry, because that data makes a difference. If we can go back and say to people, 200 students said something versus saying 20 students, it makes a big difference. So students have 8 a.m.s. How should they kind of be ready for that? Yeah.
I also have 8 a.m. on Friday, and I was thinking maybe like the other day, I may like stay on Thursday, and then go home after 8 a.m.
Other thoughts? Let's like delve into that now, right? So say that's not applicable to you. How do you fit into that? Yeah.
So I guess like people that have dorms or apartments could like let like a friend stay over for a night, that like if they're a commuter, if their parents are okay with it.
Yeah, right? And you don't need anybody's permission to do that. Do you know what I mean? So you get to a place where you hear somebody say what they say. I'm going to stay over so I can get there earlier, right? You say to people, hey, like we can have people stay in our dorms. We can have people stay overnight with us. Because there's commuters that are how long are your commutes? How long does it take you to get here? Yeah, and what about you? Okay, so that's crazy, right? An hour and 45 minutes means that you're waking up at what time to get to your 8 a.m.? Yeah, okay. So you can facilitate for people an opportunity to, whoa, I can hear myself so differently now. You can facilitate for yourself an opportunity. Anybody fasting? On date. An opportunity to seize like advantage of this, right? And you start to think like thoughtfully. You know what I mean? So it's not like a selfish engagement of practice that's like, hey, I live in Goddard or in Lipton. I was gonna roll out of bed, go to the dining hall. I'm gonna go to the prayer room. I'm gonna do whatever. It's coming from 2 hours away. It's gotta go to class at 8 in the morning. Forget about sleeping overnight. What about a place to sleep during the day, right? What's the alternative going to be, right? Like you can stamp on this thing. She can come and sleep on the floor over here, or you can remember who your teacher is, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and be like, hey, why don't you come and sleep in my dorm? I got to sleep the whole night, and you can just have the bed to yourself. Do you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? And that's what you got to start to think about things as, right? And facilitate it, because many of you don't have institutional memory of how Ramadan functions here. So you get the blessing of being able to establish practice amongst yourselves that stem now from Ramadan. And a heart that is fasting, a heart that experiences Ramadan, should be creating thoughts like this. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? Now you move from the thought to the execution of it. Because you literally have a prophet who, when the people left from Mecca, he created a system where he buddied them up with people in Medina. He didn't say, go figure it out on your own. He didn't say, like, you just got to build your own houses. He took the people who were migrating and said to the people who were there, like, you got to take care of each other, right? You're going to have to take care of each other in this Ramadan. You see what I mean? Does that make sense? Anything else that comes up? So when you go to these Ramadan planning meetings, bring up some of these ideas too. Go ahead, Kashmir.
Oh, I was bringing up a concern for after Ramadan. I feel like during Ramadan, I always feel like people high. I feel like Ramadan is like super high and everybody's practicing around you. And because you're practicing with the community, it feels easy to do the things that you're doing. So praying 5 times a day, engaging with Islam, even fasting. Like, I didn't think about fasting before Ramadan to prepare for it. So how do you keep like the iman high after Ramadan?
It's not a product of your iman that you would be thinking about fasting before Ramadan, right? And this is important to understand, and not to move away from what you're saying. A generalization I'm comfortable making is so many people attribute faith to like very human experiences, right? So the number of people who I talk to in my office, and they're like, I feel like I'm so low in my iman, you know, and then it's like, well, what's going on? You know, I just like lost a loved one and I'm sad and it's hard for me to do things. It's like, no, man, you're not low in your faith. You're just a person. You're feeling emotions, right? You're not going to know what you don't know until you know it. And even just knowing something doesn't mean that you're automatically going to implement it. How old are you?
18.
You're 18 years old, right? You've lived on this world for almost 2 decades. You're going to tap into what's innate in your practice and what it is that the people around you have been doing. You don't want to get into a place that says the presence or absence of an action in and of itself becomes the determining factor as to whether somebody is good or not. That's a very dangerous mode of assessing somebody's virtue, right? Because this is a challenge. For example, like when you engage in practice, especially publicly, there's more room for the arrogance to stem forward. That's why our teachers teach us that there's likely more sincerity in the sinner, that with real ikhlas, they seek forgiveness from God. But the person who stands and leads the prayer, they have a higher potential of being able to say that I'm doing this for a certain reason, but inwardly they're doing it for the wrong reason. Do you get what I mean? Right? So it's not like iman is the catalyst through it, but you sit down and you have stillness and then you strategize. And as you grow older, you start to think about other things that you can do as you change in phases of your life in terms of the practice that you're inculcating, right? You're going to have gifts in Ramadan that are uniquely present to Ramadan in terms of barakah, because barakah in our tradition, like we were talking before, you know, there's barakah that's uniquely attached to time, for example, right? There's barakah that's attached to places. What do I mean by this, right? Like you could go to Medina and Mecca. I've taken people there. Inshallah, we'll all be able to go on Umrah together soon, right? And that'll resume as well. I've taken people, man, to Mecca and Medina. They sleep for like 30 minutes, 40 minutes a night for a week and a half straight. They're just sitting in the masjid and prayer all night, ready to go. They're fasting like in the Arabian heat, all kinds of things. And when they leave from here, they're not doing those things here. There's a unique barakah in those cities, right? There's like certain like conditions that create blessing. You know, you make dua when it's raining. Why? Because like the Prophet said, it's a better time. There's more barakah at that time. You know, there's barakah in the time between the adhan and the iqamah. Do you get what I mean? Right? So when you're now trying to think about what I do in Ramadan and what I do outside of Ramadan, like if I'm here and my endpoint is here, but in the course of Ramadan, I also was here. Shaitan is going to get you to have remorse that this isn't where you landed, but not help you to see the net gain of what you have. And the goal in our tradition is not that I'm somebody who's always just on top of everything, but the goal of our tradition is to be able to know how to get back on your feet after you fell down. Do you see? And so you're going to definitely screw up after Ramadan, right? That's just something that's going to be there. And the idea, though, at that point is not to be like, oh man, I can't believe, you know, this thing came for me or that thing came for me. The idea is to still remember like the connection you have to God through all of it. You understand? And to believe in a God that still believes in you and your ability to move forward. So the first time you slip, you don't hesitate and still getting back up and trying again. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? What do you think?
I think that makes sense.
Why?
It changes my perspective on how I like imagine Ramadan and what happens after too. Because it's true, like I think a lot of people experience that during Ramadan, like there's a certain feeling, and after everything, like it gets harder.
You're feeling like what you were potentially capable of, situated within a certain time and certain conditions, right? And now you're going to be in spaces where you think out, how do I recreate some of these things, you know? And again, on a communal level, we'll play Maghrib in a few minutes. Sorry, I know we're a little late. We've had converts come to our center in Ramadan, and they go on like a spiritual high because they're also now surrounded by an entire family for a month that literally when the Eid is over, they don't know what to do with themselves. Because everybody still goes back now to their own spaces, and the people who got accustomed to being around so many Muslims, they start to diminish in those gatherings, right? So when you're coming to break fast at Maghrib time every night during Ramadan, you're also learning about yourself. And that's why I said it can't be just what's intuitive. There's a learning component to knowledge. You're learning that you have the ability to leave where you are to come to a place to pray in Jama'ah, right? You're learning that you have the ability to do some of what you do. You now have to learn why it is that I won't continue to do it. What's going to keep me from it? And making it concrete here is about having it, whether there's tons of people around you or it's just you on your own. You understand? Situated at the corners of Ramadan, here's Ramadan, and here's where we are in Shaban, and here's Shawwal. What you're going to have that's unique in terms of also spiritual adversaries is that there's a different opportunity now for you in this month to be protected from Shaitan in ways that you're not engaged outside of the month. So leading right into it and coming after it is going to be a bombardment of where you're most vulnerable. You want to think about this strategically, because Shaitan's going to get you where you are, not where anybody else is. We literally have traditions that have been built up as customs that have Muslims fighting with each other right until the first night of Ramadan and fighting right after Ramadan is finished, right? People, did the month start? Did the month end? They're arguing right to the moment of its onset until its conclusion. There's hadith where the Prophet has people gather together and two men are arguing with each other in the context of Ramadan. And the Prophet comes out of his home and he says, I was going to tell people of Laylatul Qadr when it is, but that knowledge was lifted because of the argumentation of these two people, right? The increase of negativity now impacts like the ability to have something positive. The idea is not when you leave from here to believe that goodness is just in the practice, but in being able to hold on to the conviction. You understand? And you still have a recognition of who your God is that you're worshiping and you're praying, and you have strategy that says like, hey man, what is it that I'm going to fall into outside of these things that Shaitan's going to come to get me at, you know, in a way that's going to hold me down? You see what I mean? Does that make sense? That's why you got to be together and do things together so that you can understand Ramadan is important to everybody and the lessons from it are important to everybody. Okay, I'm going to pause here. So just to summate, like, it's coming, be excited, you know, help one another, be kind to each other. That means you have to learn how to like talk to one another, right? And be that in a space that understands how you support each other across racial backgrounds, gender backgrounds. You start to build comfort where there's awkwardness. You don't fall into like these delineated roles that don't make sense. You're a community. The second thing, if we can help you strategically, please let us know. More than happy to sit down with anyone, one-on-one or in groups, to say, how do we plan our Ramadan? And try to start to build some of it now for yourself. And all of this is about first starting with reflection. Like you sit down and you think about it for you. How do I make these things important to me on a practical level? Okay, so before we pray, on Wednesday, there's going to be a really important gathering at Tandon that's in response to the attacks that took place in Peshawar in Pakistan. On Friday, our students from here organized an online program. There's probably about 80 or 90 people that joined it, but many of our Shia students who organized it were pretty sad that they didn't see the names of a lot of their Muslim peers that they go to school with here at NYU. And so you have to know what it's like to stand with people who are different from you, right? And what it means to be a minority that's heavily persecuted and the kind of rhetoric that goes into it. I posted about those attacks, and the tweets and Facebook posts and Instagram posts, they went pretty viral. And there was tons of comments that were written that were like, these people aren't even Muslim, right? You know, why are we calling them Shia? Why don't we just say Muslim, right? It's stupid. It's like the equivalent of saying, I don't see race. You're erasing an entire Black identity by saying you don't see color. In the same way, you can erase an entire narrative of millions of people who identify with a particular interpretation of Islam. And so I'm just going to say it to you, right? It's not any individual person's obligation, but when everyone decides that it's not their responsibility, just like your presence is felt, your absence is noticed also. And so some of you have to take it on yourselves to tell your friends that at 5 o'clock, we're going to go to Tandon and make sure that that room is filled up. In the same vein of what we're talking about here in preparation of Ramadan, you don't want anybody in your community to be starting steps away from where they could be started. And it would have been something as simple as just logging on from your phone. But for whatever reason, those things were not done. And now you have a second opportunity to show that, like, yeah, I get it. And you keep doing that with other groups and other demographics. So you show up for them and you let them know, or you just reach out to them, right? Like I literally said this in the khutbah on Friday. Just reach out to some of your friends who are Shia and let them know that you're thinking about them, right? Or even if they're not friends of yours, people that you know who are. You see what I mean? And I'm saying it to you as somebody who cares about you all. These are the kinds of things that you want to compel yourself to make the decision to be there with people in their times of need and not look for somebody else's motivation or like example to say, I'm only going to go if this person goes, right? If your friends don't go, then that's on them, right? Allah, give them hidayah and forgive them for whatever reason. If you have a legitimate like conflict or something, it's also fine. You can still just send an email or a text message or something that says, hey, like I'm thinking about you. You get what I mean? Does that make sense? And the beauty of this deen is that this is where the secrets are of increase. The Prophet was merciful, was kind, compassionate. And every act of goodness that he engaged in without condition, it's also a means through which it strengthens his heart, right? So you're depriving yourself more than anybody else. You know what I mean? It shouldn't be acceptable to us as a community that that's what the reality was on Friday. And you have to understand it in that way. And we should have so many people there on Wednesday that the room is overflowing. And if you're not there and there's not a good reason for you not being there, even in the context of what we've been discussing, I don't think then you're really understanding like how to get ready for what it is that's coming tomorrow. Does that make sense? So Wednesday at 5 o'clock, like be at Tandon, show up the same way we talked about. Like you can let people stay in your home. You can do this in Ramadan. Just reach out and be the person that says, who wants to go on the train with me? And we can all go together. Does that make sense?